All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Watch This with RickRamos. This is your host, RickRamos. I'm thrilled to be talking to you, as always, welcoming my co-host, producing partner, and good friend, Mr. Ibrahim Chavez. And we're continuing our exploration of films that, I don't know, ping pong, piggyback, this little tennis game that we're playing, describing movies that one of us suggests to the other and leads us to another. For this week's episode, I've chosen to go with one of my favorite directors, a director that I believe has unleashed upon cinema some of the most beautiful imagery that I think I've ever seen. I think a director of incredible talent, and yet one who has experienced such weird and strange production problems throughout his career that it really is amazing that he's been able to get anything on celluloid, anything cut into a standard narrative. And I think we're going to be looking at one of his later films, one of the films that he's made in the later part of his career, which is it's strange because that's still about 17 years ago. So this week we're talking about Terry Gilliam and his 2006 film Tideland, which for me, we'll start going into the backstory of both the film, Gilliam's career, my relationship to the film, and of course Mr. Chavez's impressions and interpretation of it. First off, let me just say this is a very difficult film to watch. It's there are scenes, there are aspects to it that are polarizing to some audience members. There are things that you will see in it that seem quite objectionable, but they're filtered through Gilliam's eye, and I gotta say, there's something incredibly beautiful about this film, regardless of the fact that I don't necessarily like this film. I can't say that it's a film that I watch that I walk away with a sense of enjoyment, but it is definitely a film that I'm happy that I have seen, and I'm looking forward to talking about it this week because I know you bring aspects to it, although I got to admit that I'm a little bit disappointed in knowing that. Well, I don't know what exactly to take from you, Mr. Chavez's reaction. So let's just jump into that right then, right there. You knew about this film, right? I mean, we had talked about this film in the past.
I'd seen the trailer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
I
mm-hmm. What was your impression of it?
Of the trailer or
of the film itself? Well, okay, let's go with the trailer. What was your from seeing the trailer? What was your anticipation for what the film would ultimately bring?
I was curious because the trailer looked very, just the colors. It looked very kind of 90s saturated.
Yeah.
Maybe elements of like, think of U-Turn. And I just mean the colors. Some saturation in terms of, it reminded me maybe not to the extent of a Spike Lee, but or a Tony Scott, not that saturated, but it had like a color tone to it that reminded me of that. And dreamy, the fantasy, the childlike element, the Alice in Wonderland element. So I was curious. It was on my radar.
Sure.
Probably for the last maybe a year.
Oh, okay.
And so then when after Tarkovsky's Solaris, you mentioned this, I was like, okay, let's, obviously with this association game that we're playing, like you can't deny what the other person says. You just have to accept it.
Yeah.
Not that I would have, but you just go with it. And so I was like, okay, this will be an interesting kind of place to go. And before I actually go into my impression, you had started to say that you were disappointed. I'm curious about what your disappointment is.
There's a number of elements to it that I think are disappointing. I mean, I think it's on one hand.
You had said, but hold on. But I don't know if when you said you were disappointed in something about my reaction or what you thought was going to be my reaction, right?
There was a part of me that believed that you would overlook the faults, not necessarily overlook the faults, not dismiss the faults of the film, because the faults are many. I would say it's a problematic film, but it has Gilliam's eye. It has that sense of wonder. Gilliam is one of the few directors that I know that can create fantastical worlds, like with Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, The Zero Theorem, or a film that we both really, that I love and that you embraced pretty emphatically, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Or
Brazil or whatever else.
Brazil, yeah. But he's also able to take real world environments and make them look decidedly Gilliamesque. I mean, there's a certain carnival circus feeling to his movies, and they're very. It's almost like, in a weird way, a collaboration between him and maybe it's what I imagine a Tom Waits song would look like if it were filmed.
We'll get into that.
We absolutely will get into that.
We'll get into that
because there's a lot. But I was hoping that would be I was hoping that the art of the film would help you overlook the elements that would make you dismiss the film, which is
right.
It just wasn't as interesting to you as because there are parts of it that I really dig. Gilliam is a kind of director that it's impossible for him to make a film without there being some level of brilliance to it. And I don't say that just willy-nilly. I don't just throw that out there. His films are beautiful to look at, even when they fail on certain narrative or humanistic levels, like with the Brothers Grimm. But you could put that problem on the influence of the Weinstein brothers, in particular Harvey at that point, or the Zero Theorem, which is a film that I have to go back to, but I remember leaving me very cold and where the design took over everything and the story just kind of left me floundering. So that's what I meant about that. When I
just
watched
don't get the disappointment part is what I mean.
Well, that's what do you mean? What?
Because you said you had started to say something about the disappointment, so I wasn't sure. Like,
well, that's what I meant. What I meant was, how much could you watch this film and just be blown away, or even excited, or just admiring of Gilliam's creation of this Badlands world, of this Days of Heaven field of wheat, in this house that's sitting in the middle of it, that train, these flights of fancies that dip into a world of an ocean that he takes midway through. There are elements of it that I think are just beautiful.
Yeah,
I think it's an incredibly visual film, but it's difficult to get into the mindset of a child like that, and I think it's a natural performance by the young girl, Jodelle Ferland, I think is her name. So there was that. But I'm really interested in your take on it.
Well, basically everything that you said. We've been on this journey, right? Well, we've been on the journey since we started doing the podcast together. But recently we've been, associating film to film back and forth. What one film will lead you to something, and then that will lead me to something, and back and forth. And we came from Solaris.
Yeah.
Which came from Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
Which came from EO. And I was sitting here watching this movie, and I was thinking about how I wasn't like fully immersed in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beautiful to watch, but I was asking myself, is it beautiful enough?
Okay.
And because I started to think of like, the elements of films that like draw people in. This film is a good example of questions of artistic vision and creativity. Number one.
Okay, repeat that again. I'm sorry. I had an issue with the. Go ahead again.
This film is good. It's good for asking questions about creativity and artistic vision and how that connects with accessibility of the audience, and how that can potentially like connect with self-indulgence on the part of the filmmaker. If you have a story, drama, conflict, blah blah blah, people will watch. From on one end of the spectrum, a soap opera, right? Or reality TV. There's enough drama there. There may not be enough so-called story there, but there's enough drama there for people to watch it and connect with it. Go to the other extreme of like, okay, The Godfather, right? Well plotted, blah, blah. People will watch things that have a story, obviously. Number two, if something's emotionally engaging enough, people will watch. Same thing. If it's some kind of political thing that pisses you off, you'll stay glued to it because it charges you on one end of the spectrum, or just something like a romance or a love story that whatever, people will watch it. So the other extreme is the most gut-wrenching, tragic, beautiful, whatever, most well-done thing where you're in tears at the end and it's cathartic, blah, blah, blah. Visually, if something's visually appealing enough or interestingly enough or aesthetically, without necessarily having a great story or too much emotion, like people will still watch it. Like we'll watch ads that look good. We'll scroll through shit that looks good because it appeals to whatever it appeals to, or whether that's just like our evolution or whatever. Porn does not have emotional fucking content. This is Bruce Lee and fucking Enter the Dragon. You need emotional content. Or does it have this crazy fucking drama plot? No, whatever. Like people watch it. Jerry Bruckheimer, it has all these fucking explosions, action, blah blah. People will watch it. The other extreme is the 2001 Space Odysseys of the world. Tree of Life, whatever you think, Tarkovsky, whatever you think is the most beautiful cinema, whatever, people will watch it even if they don't understand it, because it's like, well, it's at the very least it's beautiful and maybe that's transcendent. Of all of these movies that we've thrown back and forth to each other, they've all had certain areas that are accessible. eel had it had look, it had emotion, suspense. What's going to happen next with this animal? I'm not sure. Tree of Life, unconventional Hollywood story. That's what was the accessibility of Tree of Life? It was obviously the visuals, number one. Solaris, we talked about sci-fi, and how primarily it's like the aesthetic of science fiction that gets you into it is like whether it's conventional sci-fi, which is the technology that's depicted in the film and also the technology that's used to depict the technology in the film, right? Or if you're going Tarkovsky's way, you're going like, fuck, forcing the audience, as he would say, to like stick to or focus on the material world of the future or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what we had a hard part, because it's like, okay, well, there's not a lot happening in terms of story, because it's not like this leads to this, leads to this, leads to that. Is it emotional? It seems more philosophical. It seems, at a first watch, you're going, well, this seems kind of psychological. This is, okay, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you're not engaged emotionally. Visually, he's not trying to wow you with all this shit. So it's kind of, okay, where do I stand with this? Tideland, it's beautiful. It's dreamy. It has a great aesthetic. The story, if you're going to look at it from that perspective, I found myself, and I don't need story. Everyone knows who knows me through this shit. I don't need that. Like I can ride the lightning, right?
Yeah.
But it felt like there wanted to be a story here. And I mean, there is a story, but I felt like there wanted to be more. But when you have kind of like these major things happening in the beginning, it's kind of like when you have these one death and then another death, and it's like, okay, well, now how do you keep going? Like Up, like the film Up.
Yeah.
Things happen in that film, but then you're carried through. This was kind of like, where now? Where does this film go to? And I wasn't that fucked up really by what happened in the beginning in this film, the character deaths that happened. It really didn't get me. The most, in terms of the story, I was like, wait, is that lady really gonna fuck that guy?
Yeah.
That was more like, wait, really? Is that gonna happen? And then it did. And then I went back to my neutral position again. In terms of emotion, I felt like there also wanted to be, but there was a distance because of the fantasy pretend element. It made it to speak, because she's looking at it through her fantastical, imaginary kind of world or worldview. It made it seem like the consequences weren't, as instead of making it like, oh fuck, the consequences are so real and she doesn't see that. It was like, yeah, I don't think the consequences are real either. So I was like, but it's really beautiful. And why am I trying to rely on these other elements of emotion and story when typically necessarily I don't need to? So that was kind of like, I remember that you had said that part of the reason why Solaris led you to Tideland was because of some aspect of a difficulty in embracing the film or stepping into the film. Yeah. And I was feeling that. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of like, oh, I see what you mean. And so I started to question, is this beautiful enough? Tree of Life to me is beautiful enough.
Yes.
This, I think it is, but then I watched the film and then I went back and I watched it again, and I watched it in certain points, and then I started fucking with my experience of the film, and I started fucking with the film itself, and I watched it muted.
Hmm.
This is my second time watching. I watched it, not all of it, but I watched like from halfway and different points, and it was better to me muted.
Yeah.
And so that I was like, well, there's something about the dialogue. It's the script. And then I watched some of it with Tom Waits, literally, Mule Variations.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. Yeah.
And so the carnival aspect. So it opens up these questions of like, why is it that in certain parts it's kind of like, in certain films, again, you don't need or you accept or whatever. Why is it that Tree of Life is beautiful enough for me, and this one maybe it is, maybe it isn't? Why do I have to put this on mute? Why did I feel like I had to on the second time?
Well, cinema plays with your senses like that. It's never a full understanding of what's going to resonate with you. I know that when I walked out of Tree of Life, I walked out with the sense of, that was fucking amazing. Why was it amazing? I couldn't understand it. I couldn't reconcile with it. And I only saw it one time in a theater, and then 2 times when I finally broke it out of the packaging so that we could talk about it 2 weeks ago. Now, with Tideland is interesting because in 2006, this movie basically got a shittier release than Munchausen did. Munchausen played in like something like 100 theaters across the country. I don't know how the fuck it came to Phoenix, but it came to Phoenix and I saw Munchausen. That's the point that when I became a devoted Terry Gilliam fan. I had seen pieces of Brazil and I had seen all of Time Bandits, but Munchausen made me jump back into Python, Holy Grail, Life of Brian, Meaning of Life, and then it would make me anticipate everything that would come after. But Gilliam had made a name with himself as an out-of-control director, which I don't know if that's true. There's enough people that say it's not true, that Gilliam is a very responsible, focused, economically viable director. He's just a director that has had incredibly bad misfortune on his sets, whether it's Brazil in fighting with Columbia and Frank Price during the making of that film on the downbeat ending that he had for that film, a very bleak ending that you can put on Columbia's back because they said, we want a Terry Gilliam film, and then when they get it, they get this fucking dystopian, dark, cynical film. Well, that's the film that they bought. It was in the script. If you don't realize that, if you're wanting Time Bandits, that's not what's going to happen. And as Gilliam tells that story, it was a matter of they wanted him to direct a different film. I think Enemy Mine. He turned that down. Enemy Mine was supposed to be the number one property going at that point. He turned it down. I think Wolfgang Peterson would ultimately pick that up. But the fact that he had the balls to go to a studio and say, no, I don't want to make that. I want to make this. It was almost like, well, wait a minute. What is this? If you want to turn this down, how great must this product be? Let's jump on board. We want to be in the Terry Gilliam business. And that's what happened. And that is the beginning of both the legend and the ultimate disgrace of Terry Gilliam, because of the films that he made from Brazil on. I think maybe 12 Monkeys and The Fisher King were the only 2 that went off without a problem. Everything else has had some sort of problem, and epic problems that would destroy most filmmakers. When Keith Fulton and I can't remember, Pepe Lamarche, I can't remember, when they made their documentary on his attempts to make the Quixote film, the man who killed Don Quixote, Woody Allen reviewed that movie. He didn't review it, but he was quoted as saying, "It made me want to cry." Because if you've never, it's one of the great, chronicles of a film production. And I think you've seen it. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
How horrible the misfortune that Gilliam experiences during the making of that film. But that was Munchausen. That was to a level, in parts, with the writing credits and a couple other aspects, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He would jump back with the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and his lead actor would die during the making of the film. Heath Ledger, who any other filmmaker would have been like, well, fuck it now, and the Bond company would have said, we're stepping in and we're shutting this thing down. And somehow he gets Tom Hanks, Colin Farrell, no, not the, Johnny Depp, Colin Farrell, and Jude Law to step in as Heath Ledger's character and makes it work in the film. Yeah. And that's a film, a film that I got to go back to, because I don't remember loving that film. The problem is, it's like my relationship with Gilliam at this point is a love affair that started a long time ago, and I'm in love with the old Gilliam.
Yeah.
This one that is here, I admire the tenacity. I admire the bullheadedness. I admire the never-ending streak of cynical optimism that keeps him at least attempting to make films, but I don't enjoy the films like I did back then. And I don't know if that's because I was younger then and more open to the fantasy and the wow aspect of it, or if it's his filmmaking has deteriorated in that time. I don't know. I really don't know. The Brothers Grimm has moments of brilliance in it, but it's a compromised film. Zero Theorem, beautiful to look at, but I don't know what the fuck is going on there. And with The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, well, you can only hear about a movie being made for 29 years. You can only hear about a guy struggling to make this movie. And when you finally see the movie, there's no way in hell that it's going to live up to the expectations that you have in your head. I'm very respectful of Terry Gilliam. I think he's an incredible artist. I would love to have lived in a cinematic world where Gilliam was given the budgets to make the films that he wanted to make, and was given the producing support necessary to make those ideas come to fruition. Because what he has been able to get onto that screen, I don't know of another director that has come close to what he's been able to do. Lucas, I don't know.
In terms of what?
Creating these magnificent worlds that seem both cartoonish but real. Now, when you take Brazil, it's obviously all sets. And somehow 20 years later, or 15, 16 years later, he takes Vegas and he takes the garishness and the audacity of Las Vegas in the 1970s, and he shoots it in a way where it is incredibly, it's a world that you can both recognize and to some degree touch, but you view it completely different than what it is.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's a brilliant film. I think that might be his last great film. And I know I'm in the minority on that one with a lot of people, but for someone who's read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and has followed Gilliam and has seen that movie, I think that's about as good an adaptation as that book was ever able to achieve. Now, when you look at Tideland has elements of that world. I mean, that place is obviously some place that place exists. Those are fields overgrown by wheat or weeds, or I don't know what, waist high, there's that house that's in the middle of nowhere, and to view it through Gilliam does something I think that's pretty interesting, is that he shoots it from a child's perspective, so that you're seeing everything through this little girl, Jelizah-Rose, I think is her name. It's yeah, and Jelizah-Rose, this young actress, Jodelle Ferland, who I think is very good in the film. I think she's natural as a child. I think she's not cutesy. In some ways, she's annoying, like children are. She's inquisitive. And I don't know, to tell you the truth, I don't know what's going on in this fucking movie. I don't know if she's completely oblivious to what's going on around her, or if she's going slowly insane, and everything is a matter of her mind doing what's necessary to protect her body in this situation.
Yeah, it's like an adaptation strategy.
Yeah. I mean, for those who haven't seen it, and Gilliam laughs with Jeff Bridges, because Jeff Bridges plays basically the Janet Leigh role. Big star, and then this shit happens. And then
right.
And most of those shots are Jeff Bridges. That's Jeff Bridges. At first I thought that has to be a dummy. They built a dummy. But no, that's Jeff Bridges for those shots.
Well, in that case, he plays Janet Leigh, but he also plays Norman Bates' mom.
Yes, he does. He does, and I think it's really interesting. I think it's really see, the film is polarizing, even among it's polarizing among viewers who most people hate this film. I think the only place that it did well, huh?
Hold on, the only place that it did well.
Japan.
Hold that thought.
Oh, okay. So, sorry. Go ahead.
So that to catch everyone up who hasn't seen it, who is gonna, some people are gonna pause, go watch it, blah blah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are those who are like, no, let's hear it. What is it about?
It's not a traditional narrative. It's this is something that is constant in the last probably 4 or 5 episodes that we've done. Solaris, non-traditional narrative. Tree of Life, non-traditional. Io, non-traditional. Alhazard Balthazar, closer to a traditional narrative than any of the other ones, but still on the fence. This is a character study of a little girl dealing with her life.
And Wings of Desire also.
Wings of Desire, yeah, Wings of Desire. I'm glad that you brought that one up too.
Fallen Angels.
Angels. These are not traditional. This is not, we're getting the band back together to save an orphanage type of a story. There's no point A to point B, and we arrest a drug dealer at the end. That's not what this shit is. These are these flights of fantasy. These are character studies in which we look at a main character and we say, well, how is this person going to adapt to this specific situation? And what's beautiful about that is that it forces you to ask yourself, how would I have dealt with that? And in this case, how would I have dealt with it at 9 years old? And I think that's really telling in this film. It's a young girl who is the daughter of a junkie rock musician played by Jeff Bridges, and his wife, who Jennifer Tilly in a fat suit, and Queen Grunhilde, I think is her name in the film. She's a mess. She's just a mess. And it's this little girl that is living in this squalor, and it's a fairy tale. It's a Grimm's fairy tale.
Yeah, and it very much puts itself in the tradition of Alice in Wonderland. And
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. The level of influence of Lewis Carroll is it's almost, he should get a fucking writing credit as far as I'm concerned with this thing. There's that element to it. I mean, she does tumble down a rabbit hole at one point, which I thought was beautifully executed, beautifully done. This little girl, 9 years old, is basically the heart, soul, and brains of this family. And it's fucked up because right at the get-go, you see Jeff Bridges on stage playing in some shithole bar, rocking out, and the next scene is them in this house, him yelling at his wife yelling back at him, and the daughter basically cooking his heroin.
Yeah, she's setting up the rig and all.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah.
I mean, she's got that spoon. She's got it above the flame. She's holding the needle. At one point, she puts the needle in her mouth. Remember that? And all that shit is really disturbing. But at the same time, you're looking at it and you're like, look at the professionalism of it. Look at how her life has taken on an aspect of this is normality. She doesn't see anything wrong with it because she doesn't know anything else. And those are elements that are really kind of depressing and very telling about society because this kind of shit is happening out there.
Right.
It exists. It's real. It's an honest thing. It was like, you remember the scene from Casino where Sharon Stone is she snorting? She's not shooting up. She's snorting, and she just looks at her daughter and goes, "Don't ever do this." She tells her little girl, "Remember that? Don't ever do what mommy's doing."
I remember the generalized hot mess of Sharon Stone in that film. But,
It's like she's got fucking Jimmy Scumbag Woods on the phone trying to extort money. And she's doing coke in front of her daughter. I mean, this is the level of child abuse that is out there, but it's a naturalized child abuse rather than let me beat the shit out of my kid. In one sense, it's kind of a sweet little story of a little girl taking care of her parents. But
it's just inverted. Yeah.
Yeah. But then you get that splash of water. Like, they're fucking junkie degenerates. I mean, and so the wife dies from a methadone overdose. Jeff Bridges' character, he freaks out and he's afraid of prison. He's afraid of all the paraphernalia there. So they got to get the hell out of there. They jump on a bus, head out to West Texas, where he grew up, and they go to his mom's house.
The nicest Greyhound that I've ever seen. That was one thing I was like, Greyhounds don't look like that. Greyhounds do not fucking look like that.
I asked myself, is that a product of the early 2000s or what the fuck? Yeah, because it was much nicer and a lot emptier than I've ever been on one.
Yeah, and it was a different crowd.
Yeah, it was a way different crowd. For a man who has made many travels, who has been on that road many times, I thought that you might get a kick out of those shots.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, I haven't been on that. That wasn't my route.
That was not. Well, you weren't going to visit your mama in West Texas, so
True.
Don't be dismissive, motherfucker. Okay, don't. It can't all be about the Chavez experience. But they get to this house and I guess he's gonna hide out. He's gonna figure out that he's a junkie. He doesn't know what the fuck he's gonna do. He just knows that he has to get out of wherever he's at. He takes his medicine and overdoses, and now it's the little girl. I don't know if I think she realizes that he has died. I'm pretty sure she realizes he has died, but she needs to protect herself in the way that she does.
Yeah.
And so she slips into that fantasy world and she starts exploring she starts exploring the Badlands, the fields. There's a beautiful shot of her in an overturned bus where she's looking at fireflies, and a train comes rushing past, and it's just shaking her, and she's just having, there are moments like that Gilliam is able to capture, that those are the things about this movie that I love. Those are the things that I fall in love with, and I think that I take away from, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. She has conversations with these doll heads. They are her only friends, and there is a sense of slipping into madness, but I don't know, to a certain degree, I don't know what the point of this movie is, but I'm on the ride, and I'm okay with that. I feel like I'm enjoying not enjoying so much as intrigued. I'm intrigued by what Gilliam is putting out there. This is a polarizing personal film, because I don't know what to take from it.
I felt like once I because it was during the first viewing that I thought to myself to try to mute it.
Yeah.
But
now, with something like that, is it because the dialogue or the little girl's delivery is annoying you? Or is it because
it's not, I don't know the why at that point.
You may never know the why. I don't know if you did you ever find the why?
Well, I think it's the dialogue, but I'm about to tell you what I think also.
Sure.
And I'm not 100%, but in a previous episode, and I don't know what film it was, I was telling you that I couldn't get into whatever movie it was, and I don't remember what movie again it was, and I'm not sure why I couldn't get into that movie for whatever reason. And then I turned up the volume.
Yeah, I remember
this. For some reason, it kind of shifted it for me, and it kind of, for whatever reason, it worked more. And I don't know what. It was just an instinct to do that, and I just did it, and it worked. I had the instinct to turn off the volume, but I said, well, I'm not gonna do this until I watch it the whole way through, and then I'll come back, and that's what I did. And then it was kind of like, okay, watching it with the volume off, number one, I had to be more engaged, because I was like, okay, well, I mean, I know what's happening in terms of like where it goes in the story, but I still was kind of like looking at it only, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, what is happening? Yeah. Like, if I don't know what they're saying, and I don't know what any of this sounds like, I'm so much more confused. And because I'm more confused, I think rather than being like disengaged, like, fuck it, I don't get it, so whatever, I'm actually more engaged. So I think it was probably the dialogue.
Yeah.
But I think part of the reason that I couldn't get into it, I think, is because I think the way that the film plays out, you know too much too soon. And because you know too much too soon, it's kind of like, okay, like, I still feel grounded. I still have some sense of orientation here.
Yeah.
Tree of Life, I mean, you understand what's happening is, you understand that it's like, this is this childhood thing. But there are still things that come that you're like not sure. It's still like, there are still curves in the road. It was kind of like, I felt like I got it. It's this little girl in her fantasy after her parents die. Okay. But it was so much more disorienting on mute that I preferred that because I wanted to understand it or to feel like I understood it less. And I wanted to be more disoriented. I wanted, you know what I mean? And
no, that's a very valid description of it. That's a very, I think with the lunacy of what he's putting on that screen, there is a sense of I want there to be more mystery to it.
And then I was thinking about it and I said, well, yeah, and then I put the Tom Waits. That was just for my own enjoyment. Yeah. And then I was like, well, this isn't, is this really a story about a girl's ability to cope through fantasy? Or is it really about Gilliam's own neglect and orphanhood within the film industry?
Wow, that's interesting.
Is this just a metaphor for Gilliam? Is Gilliam just that kid? And I kept asking myself, yeah, I mean, it's all he has to hang on to, Terry Gilliam, is his belief in the dream worlds and fantasies of his own creation, just like the little girl.
Well,
he doesn't really know who to trust.
No.
He's watched his projects die, and he's had to keep them alive in his own mind. So again, he survived the train wrecks of Hollywood, only to get adopted again, and it's this up and down thing with him. So I looked at it in terms of it's kind of like this autobiographical piece disguised as a fantasy of a little girl, and I'm like, okay, it's something else now.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, it's kind of like, well, I met it halfway in that point. If I look at it from that perspective, on its own, it's kind of like these issues that we talked about. But through that interpretation of like, this is Gilliam's story in as a filmmaker.
So would you say that that's self-indulgent? Would you call it a self-indulgent film? Would you call it a pretentious film in any way? No.
I mean, even that, it's like, well, what when we make fun of Tarantino and we say, well, he's self-indulgent, like, what is self-indulgent? I mean, is Terrence Malick self-indulgent because he promises to give us Terrence Malick, and then what happens when someone's they're self-indulgent, and then they do something different, and then you're like, they veered off into something else. They're not even
betrayed something.
They betrayed themselves, and it's kind of like, well, which is it? It's kind of like they say obscenity or cool or whatever. It's like these different things that it's like, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it type of bullshit. Like, I don't think this is self-indulgent. I think he's doing something with a purpose. I think he's trying to create something, and I think he is creating something. I think though baked into that creation is his fucking filmmaker story.
Well, let's get into that, because I'm going to give you information that you might not have been privy to unless you did the research, unless you brought up Gilliam. I mean, Gilliam is somebody that I have followed for a number of years, and I knew about this film. I knew that he was making this film. It was a weird period in his career where he was slowly being pushed out of the studio system, where it was becoming more and more difficult for him to work within the constraints of his vision. Is far too, I don't want this to sound cunty, because I don't want it to be like he's greater than Spielberg is able to put what he wants on the screen. Lucas did it for many years. Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, people are able to work within the system and do something that is great. even with difficult material like Nolan or David Fincher. So what's Terry Gilliam's excuse? I don't know. I can't. Maybe the generation he comes from, I don't know. But at the time that he made Tideland, which would have been 2005, right before this, he was making the Brothers Grimm, which was a Dimension film. Dimension, if you recall, was a subset of Miramax. It was a subset, and that was Miramax when it was Harvey and Bob Weinstein Miramax, not Disney Miramax. This was before the Weinstein Company a few years later, if you recall.
Yeah.
If anything, Harvey Weinstein was one of these characters in Hollywood, scumbag that he was. He made promises to directors to bring them in and give them a voice. He pulled Scorsese in the late 90s for Scorsese's dream project, Gangs of New York, and then just went head to head with him, fighting him, arguing him with length, with casting, with so many different aspects that made it difficult for that film, and it was a real nightmare project for Martin Scorsese in what should have been the culmination of Scorsese had been wanting to make that film since the mid-70s. So it had to have been a huge disappointment. And at some point we have to talk about it, because I don't remember how good or bad a film that is. Do you? I just no. So yeah.
No.
So
it's been years.
Yeah. So we're talking 98, 99 at that point. Gilliam, who was suffering under the yoke of he had just come off of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which would have been 98, 99. He had proven that he could stay on budget, that he could deliver something that was, at least, if the studio didn't screw up the marketing, it would be something. Because I mean, I think the years have come to say that Fear and Loathing, I don't know if many people would call it a great film. I would call it a great film. A lot of people call it excessive. A lot of people call it difficult. I think it's a brilliant film. You would have the nightmare that was The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and watch Lost in La Mancha if you really want to know how badly a film can falter and the shit that can happen. But that was also Gilliam flying too close to the sun. No, seriously, right. That was, because if you think that you can get a film like that made at that time at that time of cinematic history, solely with European money, he had his head so far up his ass. There was no way a film like that could get made outside of the studio system. And I think he raised something like $32 million when he actually needed something closer to $45 million. But watch the movie. The whole thing falls apart in ridiculous ways, including a lead actor who has a herniated disc and can no longer ride a horse. Quixote rides a horse for 60-70% of that story. A torrential flood that washes away equipment. And not only washes away equipment, but changes the color of the landscape in which they spent a day shooting, rendering everything unusable. So there's that. Harvey Weinstein came in like the pedophile with a bag of fucking lollipops, and he wooed him. And Gilliam has always said, if you watch The Madness of Munchausen, Thomas Sowell pulled him in saying, I can do this, I can do that. Arnon Milchan as well, the great Israeli film producer. He convinced Gilliam that they could do all this stuff, and Gilliam just, hey, let's go.
Ate it up.
Yeah, ate it up, believed the bullshit, believed the motherfucker that told him he was pretty. You can never believe the motherfucker who tells you you're pretty. That cocksucker is lying to you. He wants what he wants. You got to be careful. Well, Gilliam goes on that trip. And they were met with nothing but problems during the making of the Brothers Grimm. So much to the point that Gilliam shut down the movie for 2 weeks. Now that shit's unheard of. I don't know how they didn't sue him for that. But he shut down the movie. Weinstein wanted to recut the movie. Gilliam fought with him because he thought he had final cut. There was a whole anyway, there was a 6-month break in that film. He goes off and he makes this film. And it's one of the fastest turnarounds of any film, because from inception, from adapting the book that it was written on, and I'm not sure of the author, but everything, it's there. From adapting the book into shooting it, into casting, shooting it, and cutting it, 6 months.
Really?
And then went back and finished the Brothers Grimm. So what you're saying is a fucking bullseye statement that I hadn't really considered. You're talking about a director who was at his wit's end with the Weinsteins. You're talking about a director who had decades worth of obstacles put in front of him and was carrying the weight of past sins. You got to remember, he embarrassed the shit out of Frank Price in Colombia with Brazil. And then, I think it was Colombia, or it was it was Universal. That's right. He embarrassed the shit out of Universal with Brazil. And then they basically got their revenge on him with Munchausen by calling him a completely out of control director. Now, you've seen that movie. I've seen that movie. Mm-hmm. There is no way that film, there is no way that every dollar that wasn't stolen during production isn't on that screen. That is an incredible, beautiful, highly imaginative film. And with almost no budget on this film, he does something very similar. And working with Nicola Pecorini, his cinematographer, his one-eyed cinematographer, who he worked with first in Fear and Loathing Las Vegas, the original Man Who Killed Don Quixote, an artist who was fired by Harvey Weinstein during the making of the Brothers Grimm after shooting like 6 weeks worth of, I mean, it's what you're saying is completely valid. What you're saying is pretty on. I don't know if you know how on point you were with that, because it wasn't just what you're saying. What you're describing isn't just Brazil, Munchausen, and the Man Who Killed Don Quixote. It's directly 5 minutes before he made this fucking movie.
That's insane.
Yeah. I didn't think you knew that. So, I mean, I'm
well, I mean, look, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, look, I just know the common knowledge shit, mm-hmm. which is enough to give me that impression.
Yeah.
So now you're telling me that you're basically telling me he's an orphan making mm-hmm. a film about an orphan in that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, versus like, oh yeah, I lost my film. Mm-hmm. I almost lost my film 20 years ago.
Yeah.
No, this is like I'm fucking on hiatus right now.
This is not constant disappointment or weight that I'm carrying from years ago. This is shit that happened last week, and this is my response to it. And to make it to go even further with it, when promoting this film, because they couldn't get anybody to buy this film. I mean, would you invest in this if you were a studio head? Would you want to put this fucking movie out?
Right.
From a financial standpoint, his good friend, right. Michael Palin, the great Python, Michael Palin, told him after watching, he said, "This is either the greatest film you've ever made or the worst." I think that I think that's not hyperbole. I think that's pretty accurate. It's either a great film or it's bad. I don't know. I don't know what the fuck this movie is. But that's why I wanted to talk about it. That's why I wanted to get into this thing.
The night comes direct off of. No, go ahead.
No, please. What were you going to say?
Well, it's also interesting, coming off of Solaris, where we're talking about someone who is working within the Soviet system.
Yeah.
Trying to fucking do his vision, and whatever you think of that, you know what I mean? But yeah, a fantasy from the fantasy of Brothers Grimm to the fantasy of Tideland. The direct response. He's ping-ponging with himself. We're ping-ponging with all these fucking films, with the history of cinema. He's ping-ponging with himself.
He is. He's Gilliam's. I think Gilliam is probably the most. The films are true products of Gilliam's hardship, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is a guy who has had incredible difficulties making his vision a reality and being able to put it on that screen. He went out of his way to find. I mean, this movie played in one theater in LA for a week. And it was during the 6 months, it was 2006, it was during the 6 months where I was not allowed to drive in the greater Los Angeles.
Right.
My past caught up with me. And this was before I started taking the bus and the train system. And I didn't know how I was going to, I knew I had to see this film, but I didn't know how I was going to see this film. So on my spot on Beverly, I got on my bike and I rode to the landmark Nuart in Santa Monica. I rode. I think it took me about an hour and a half to get out there. And that shit is all uphill if you don't realize that when you're doing it. It's a fucking nightmare. Until you get to Santa Monica, you just ride smooth. But I remember going to see that movie and just thinking, walking out of it going, and it was the first time it was the first and last time that I saw it until this past weekend. And I remember thinking, that was incredible. But I have no idea. And this is the best. This is one of the better type of experiences when you walk out of a theater and you're like, what the fuck did I just watch? Is it me? Did I miss it? Am I imagining something? Did Gilliam lose his fucking mind all of a sudden? I don't know what the hell I saw, but I know that I was intrigued. I can't say that I liked it, but I knew that I was intrigued by it. And I remember images staying with me. I remember things sticking out with me. Even though when I watched it the other night, I was like, wow, I forgot about that. I completely forgot about that. To go back to your orphan story, when he was promoting this film, he crashed the Daily Show. I think it was Comedy Central Daily Show, and he went out there to the studio, in front of the studio, and he had on a sandwich board on him, and he said, I think it said either homeless or orphan director.
Really?
Yeah, or orphaned artist willing to direct for food.
Wow.
So he was like, I mean, Gilliam has a sense of humor, and Gilliam has a ballsy type of fuck you attitude. And I think that comes out of his times. And especially Python, that era. You gotta remember, he's the only American born member of Python.
Yeah.
And he moved to England And I think he's expatriated. I don't know. I think he might have finally given up his U.S. citizenship. He was just tired of it. We're just tired of the bullshit.
Yeah.
But he's struggled to figure out a way to become independent. And I think if he were 20 to 25 years younger, he would be thriving in the potential for cinema right now. In being able to shoot on digital, shoot fast, get in, get out, and to play with the tools of cinema. But at the same time, I think his more practical films, Munchausen, there's no CGI there. There's green screen, but there's no CGI there. It's more powerful than all of the CGI in Dr. Parnassus. And I think with the exception of the fields turning into an ocean, everything is practical in this movie as well. Maybe not the fireflies, but everything else is.
So generationally, what is keeping him from thriving
now?
Why would he thrive if he were younger, versus for being able to thrive now?
Because it's hard as fuck to direct a movie when you're 80 years old.
How old is he?
I think he's around 77, 78, somewhere around there. I think he's I think there comes a point where and this is when we talked about he's 80 years old. He'll be 80 in November. No. He'll be 83 in November.
Oh, yeah.
So the chance of him going out there and managing a major film production on the level that his mind is capable of, it's just very unlikely. His time has come and his time is gone. And that's very sad, because what it means is that it's a loss to us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people talk about the equality of the film industry and voices, and you and I have talked about this. There's a documentary on Netflix airing right now about women in film, and I gotta be honest, I don't give a shit about opportunities for women in film. What I care about are good stories. And the fact that women are not allowed to shoot or not allowed to contribute in that way means we've lost out on great stories.
Yeah.
And I think with someone of Gilliam's age and his experience, the fact that we're not going to see anything else from him, that makes me sad.
Yeah, we're like that little girl now too.
Yeah. There's something very problematic about that, and you want to call it ageism, you want to call it misogyny, you want to call it, any of the phobics that you want to put on it, or I'll readily admit I'm fucking selfish, because I hate the fact that I'm only going to get a certain kind of story from a certain kind of person, even though Terry Gilliam, white male, but he's an old white man. So there's something there that I wish, I'm glad that I have the films that I have, but
at least he's oppressed,
Yeah, a little bit at this point. Yeah. But it's like, what next in October, Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon comes out. Martin Scorsese is 80, maybe 81. And he said in interviews, and we're going to talk about this in an episode, he's he doesn't have a lot of time left. Now, he's in decent health as far as an 81-year-old man could be in, but he's 80 years old.
Yeah, I mean, time is the killer,
That's right. Time is what do they say? Time
they say a lot of things about time.
No, there was time is unbeaten. Time has an unbeaten score. Everybody loses.
I mean,
Yeah.
So why in Japan? You had started to say this
I don't
about an
know.
hour ago or
I
something.
don't know. I mean, but it got critical, and it was critically acclaimed, and audiences loved it. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about the Japanese. Maybe I would have thought in Europe it would have been more comfortable, but with their aesthetic. I can see where it's different. This is me shitting on my own country and my culture, but the truth of American culture. There's a
make
lot
that
of
distinction.
yeah, I got to.
One of your cultures, yeah.
One of my cultures, yes. American, not to say that the other one is this highly intellectual moral standard of goodness, and that I eagerly embrace.
Yeah.
You know, but this is definitely, there are elements in this film that are very problematic, and I felt uncomfortable watching a couple of moments, but like there's a relationship between the young girl and a young retarded man in the film, and Jelizah-Rose wants him to be her boyfriend. And you remember when we talked about this with Leon, the professional?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about it right now.
Yeah. The Natalie Portman John Reno relationship, especially in the international cut, was problematic because of the sexualization of Natalie Portman. Now, in that film, I think you can see it more. This film, I don't see a sexualization of the character. I see her as a little girl playing grown-up,
Right.
imagining what it is. There is a discomfort in where is this going?
Right.
You know? So and I know if I felt it, then it was something that would be prevalent in a lot of audiences, a lot of reactionary audiences. But Gilliam in some interviews, and particularly the Arrow Blu-ray release, talks just about that. It's like there's nothing pedo about it. It's about there's nothing. We want to make everything dangerous to children. In our heads, children are so fragile and so in danger because it does something for us as
This is
guardians,
speaking,
I
or
guess.
Gilliam?
This is Gilliam. And he's like,
Okay.
but that's not the relationship. Because the young retarded man, he doesn't understand it either. But in fact,
yeah, there's a moment where it looks like they're gonna kiss because he's like on top of her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But in fact, he's the one that's been abused. He was the one that was abused by her grandmother. You remember that?
Yeah. So,
he talks
but
about
what I'm there's also the element of like you're also led there because it's like, well, what's the only thing left that can possibly happen to her?
Yeah.
That's gonna have those stakes that are that high. It's like, okay, well, if she dies, okay, well, she dies. That's one thing that can happen. But what's worse? Now, if you start to, in your own mind, weigh out what these things are, and you're like, well, if she's abused in that way, as a viewer, you're probably like, well, that's worse.
Yeah.
And obviously, if she dies, the likelihood of the movie continuing without her is low.
Sure.
So what's worse? In order to still have a movie, but something can be worse. But it doesn't get there. But you're wondering. And in those moments, maybe those are moments that, like, when I talked about emotional engagement, like, you're engaged because it's fucking uncomfortable. And when that isn't, when the potential for that isn't present, at least, or immediate, or however you want to describe it, then that kind of, like, that tension slack is slack again.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are definitely, I mean, from the drug use
Mm-hmm.
and having her prepare it, to her relationship with her mom, where the mom is like, "You little bitch,"
Yeah.
and when the mom dies, and then after she's pretending to be her mom and talking to herself as her mom, but mocking her mom.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of. So are you saying that this is also why it wouldn't have been done well in the United States, because of audiences are too uncomfortable with the shit?
Audiences are far too uncomfortable with this kind of thing. They're uncomfortable with the realities of the world. They want everything wrapped up in a nice bow and a happy ending. I mean, if to make this palatable for an American audience, she would have had, Child Protective Services would have had to swoop in, save her from all this, and had a ready-made family that would take her in, and she would come out of this, and she would realize the danger, or she would. This is,
Or she would have had to have actually been molested and, like, survived it.
Yeah, yeah. But this is,
you know
Gilliam,
what I mean?
yeah. But this is
it
Gilliam.
doesn't happen. So
No.
kind of.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. It's. I think American audiences, they don't want what's possible. They want something like either in the story the character is protected, or else in the story the character is saved,
Mm-hmm.
or redeemed, or is able to get revenge, or is able to find justice, or something like that.
Sure.
They don't want the uncomfortable possibility. American audiences, they want answers. They don't want questions.
Yeah.
They don't want maybes. They want concrete shit.
Yeah. And they also can't look at it as what it is, a modern-day Grimm's fairy tale, where the kid survives it at the end and just keeps on. I mean, in a weird way, 20-plus years earlier, Gilliam had shot the exact same ending with Time Bandits. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen Time Bandits, but you've never seen Time Bandits, right?
I haven't, no. I kind of know what happens at the end, but
there's fire, there's
the
flames.
The little girl getting, okay.
And she's just sitting there. And Time Bandits, the little boy is just sitting there. The parents are gone. They're all on their own. And, Gilliam. And it's funny because Gilliam said that when they were marketing that film, people were pissed off at the ending because people were like, well, what's going to happen to the kid? The kid's got no one to protect himself. And when they interviewed little girls were like, well, where's his mom? He doesn't have a mommy and daddy now. What's he going to do? And they interviewed little boys, and little boys were just like, he's going to be okay. He's going to take care of himself. And I think,
really?
You hear, and this is all shit Gilliam is saying. So who knows? Whenever I hear somebody say that this is what was said, or this was what was told to me, yeah.
Yeah, this is all anecdotal bullshit. Like, what did Terry Gilliam fucking interview a cross section of fucking children? You know what I mean? And, like, how big was his sample size? And
Exactly.
Like, whatever. Yeah.
But that's the idea that a children's story has to be tied up in the Disneyfication of it. He's anti-Disney. He's against that idea. He's, Gilliam embraces the idea that the world is an ugly place. It can be an ugly place. It can be a beautiful place, but it can be a very ugly place that is unfair to the people in it. You somehow survive it. And this little girl survives it. This little girl comes out on the other end. And I mean, there is a sense of, if she has survived everything in this movie, she's going to somehow manage to get through it through the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And she's going to come out on the other side with a better handling. She's hearted by it. And I think that's the most, like I've said with just about every one of the movies that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, I don't know if I would recommend this movie to any of my friends. I don't think the movies that we've watched and the movie we're going to watch next week, I think people would say, "What the fuck is wrong with you telling me to see this? What is wrong with you? What the fuck? Who the fuck are you?" And you know, is that a problem with me or is that a problem with them? Well, I'm going to always lean into the fact that it's a problem with them. Because I think this is a valuable film. I think this is a good film. I think it's a well-made film, well acted, beautifully shot. I think there's so much in it. Do I like it? Not necessarily. But shit, if I'm talking to anybody who could support that idea, it's you. You don't necessarily have to like the movie to recognize the power and what about it that is great. In a weird way, I think this is a great Gilliam film. I don't know if it's as accessible a film.
Yeah.
To make it, to make it embraced. That's my, but I do think it's an incredible film.
Yeah, and this is kind of what this journey is where it's taking us. It's taking us to films that, if we consciously decided, and we have in the past said like, hey, like, I want to talk about this, or I want to blah, blah, blah. It wasn't like we sat down and said, all right, Tideland. It was just kind of, it emerges from as a response to the previous film.
Yeah.
And then you start to see, how is EO related to this little girl, a donkey, the things that happen to a donkey and how the donkey survives until either it does or it doesn't. And, you just see how all of these things are just interwoven, and then it becomes Tree of Life, and then it becomes whatever else. And, and then next week, and I'll, stay tuned. We're going to talk about Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void. We're going in places that are surprising to us.
Yeah.
And when you allow yourself to be surprised, you're not always going to fall in love with every fucking surprise. But you are going to see and experience new things. And I love The Godfather.
Yeah.
But that's not the extent of like what I want to fucking watch. I love Blade Runner, and I watch Blade Runner. I watch it at least once a year.
Yeah.
But there's more to cinema than the shit that we like and the shit that we love and the things that some list says are the top 100 or the top 25 of this genre or the top blah blah blah, or whatever it is. There's all kinds of shit that we need to get into.
Well, I think on one aspect, you and I both are on the same page when it's we're not looking to find difficult films, but we're not afraid of difficult films. And difficult films oftentimes challenge your sensibilities, challenge your ideas, and your understanding of the world. I want to go into those waters. I want, especially as I get older, I want to see more and more things that are going to challenge me. And I want to know that there is still room there for me to say, wow, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. And the element of not necessarily just using your conscious mind to choose what you're going to watch.
Sure.
To allow some randomness, or to allow hunches, instincts, whatever it is, because that's going to bring out the universe of cinema will bring you gifts, and who knows what those gifts in turn will bring.
If you're willing to be open to what is out there, you're going to see a lot of shit. You're going to see a lot of things that you're like, oh my God, what the fuck was that? But at the same time, you're going to see things that are like, wow, I didn't realize something like that was out there. I mean, I never would have thought a movie about a donkey traveling, or two movies about donkeys for that matter. I didn't think that you could make two movies about donkeys and give me a better understanding of the species, of humanity, in such a way. Very lucky to have experienced that. And I want to talk about it. I want to share that. So, that's the episode for this week. Is there anything that you want to leave them with, Mr. Chavez?
Other than what we've already left you with, if you want to leave us with something, if you want to support, if you listen to us, you like our shit, and you want us more caffeinated, and you think we're pretty, visit us at buymeacoffee.com. If you want to buy us a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/watch RickRamos. That's buymeacoffee.com/watch RickRamos. Or go to the website, Buy Me a Coffee, type it in, Watch This with Rick Ramos. You'll find us there. You can pour a little in our cup if you are so inclined or so inspired or so moved. And we'd appreciate it.
That we would.
We'll continue to make our shit, see our shit, talk about our shit, hit the mark, miss the mark, and take the ride with you.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.